Welcome back, Trinidad and Tobago. We're into the second hour of the morning edition. I'm Urvashi Tiwari Rupnarayan, very pleased to be sharing your company this morning. Well, last Tuesday, the Ministry of Education released a statement following a meeting with stakeholders on draft recommendations for the operation of schools for the terms 2 and 3 of the academic year 2021 to 2022. Some of the items on the draft include a general recognition for students to return safely to physical school, the need for close supervision to ensure students do not breach safety protocols, and the impact of quarantine arrangements on school operations. This morning, we're very pleased to be joined by Education Minister Dr. Nian Gadsby-Dolly. Dr. Gadsby-Dolly, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Good morning to you and to all listeners and viewers.
Now, Minister, I'd like to start off with where we are at. Now, just Saturday, the Prime Minister would have released or displayed some information indicating the vaccination numbers of different sectors. And we did note that education seemed to be among the lowest, if I'm not mistaken, just around 50% of public servants within education have been vaccinated. So that's where we are at. Of course, there's one more month. The extension for public sector safe zones have in fact been extended. So there's this extra month. When you look at the numbers, I mean, of course, you're a minister, when you look and you actually see that your ministry, the public servants falling under your ministry are among the least vaccinated, what do you think?
Well, the first thing that we have to recognize is that persons are not mandated at this time to reveal their vaccination status. And if you know Trinidad and Tobago, you know that there are persons who, even though vaccinated, will not want to reveal that status. And therefore, we have to accept all of the figures that are collected at this point in time with that caveat, understanding that you may not have the full picture at this point in time because of that circumstance. And that actually is quite a large proportion of persons. I mean, we have even from informal outreaches to some members of staff. That's the feedback you get. So of course, we would like to ensure that we have persons who are vaccinated because for their own safety, to ensure that, if they are exposed to the virus, and we see how many people are being exposed daily, that they would be safe and that we would be able to maintain at the ministry a critical mass of staff for work. And that is really one of the things that has been affecting and will continue to affect the productivity, the number of persons available for work. Thus far, though that is the percentage that has been reported, thus far we have had the cooperation of staff coming out, and we are able to complete our day-to-day tasks. So though the number reported is low, we take it with the understanding that one, it may not be the full picture, and two, we do have a reasonable critical mass of staff coming out to perform duties.
Of course, even we see unionists, particularly with TUTA, questioning whether or not schools are essentially or are to be considered safe zones. Have you all come to a position on that just yet?
The Attorney General and the Prime Minister have been very clear about the issue of making it what is called a quasi-safe zone. What is being contemplated is not mandatory vaccination of the children. And therefore that sets it apart from what is traditionally understood as a safe zone, because in a safe zone, everybody has to be vaccinated. If even the mandatory vaccination for teachers and adults in the school system is put in place, even if that comes to fruition, the mandatory vaccination of children has not been contemplated at this time, and therefore it will not be a safe zone in the traditional sense.
But the public servants are required to be vaccinated.
At this point in time, legislation has not been passed, and if it is passed, well then yes, they will be.
Okay, so schools will be, quasi-safe zones, as you mentioned, will be considered that. There's also a perception, as we plan to reopen schools for terms 2 and 3, there's a perception by some parents and members, even of the education sector, that maybe we should wait for the Omicron variant to, peak and come back down.
the Omicron variant, and then there's the Delta Cron, as far as I know now, and then who knows what else there will be. And what we do know, however, is that we've had some students out of school for more than 2 years. And what we do know, based on the diagnostic test that the curriculum division of the ministry would have sent out for teachers to administer to their students, is that we have students who are, not doing as well as they could do. We have teachers who are having serious difficulty with our students, not just ones who may have connectivity problems or maybe may have device issues, and that's an ongoing thing. However, we have so many students who have devices, who have connectivity, and just are not motivated because of the social circumstance of their learning. We have children who have devices, connectivity, but their living conditions are not conducive to everyday school, and they don't have supervision. So there are myriad issues involved with it. So though we look at the Omicron, and though it is cause for concern, or the health circumstances are cause for concern, we also have to consider the long-term effect on our children of being out of school.
So, Minister, let's talk about the reopening. What is being contemplated at this point in time? Maybe we could start off. Well, we already know forms 4, 5, and 6 are back out. What is being contemplated for lower secondary school? And then if we could move across to primary school students.
Mm-hmm. For lower secondary, what's being contemplated is bringing out forms 1 to 3 on a rotational basis. Rotational simply because schools cannot operate at the 100% capacity to allow for social distancing. In this case, because we have many schools where they've gone over the number of students that were already prescribed for the school, and therefore we could call them overcrowded schools. The issue of bringing students out with fully 3-foot distancing may make for some difficult rotational schedules. So the contemplation is whether we can have schools operating at 50% capacity in teaching spaces, and you would include distancing of 3 feet outside of that. That is one of the things that's being contemplated. Being contemplated also is whether we can have them come out on a rotational schedule based on that 50% capacity. Different schools using different models of attendance based on the number of students at the school and based on the size of the school plan. So that ratio is very important because it will say how many students can be accommodated at the school at any one point in time based on a 50% capacity. Some schools also, though we are prescribing the models, and we have offered prescribed models to allow for some standardization in attendance schedules, which will allow for parents to have a reasonable understanding of their children getting to school physically on a number of days. We are allowing for flexibility, and we've proposed flexibility for the parents, for the principals to introduce different schedules based on the fact that they might have large rooms, that they might want to use a large auditorium, they might have fold out barriers between classes that can be used. So though the ministry has prescribed some models, we are asking that schools look at these models, and if they want to modify that, but with a basic attendance for students for at least 5 days in a 10-day cycle, which means that students must have a minimum attendance, however the timetable is composed, of 2 days at least in every week. Then the other days, and that's physical, the other days the students will be exposed to asynchronous work that would be set from the teachers. There has been, in some cases, the question of students getting full work, synchronous work 4 or 5 days of the week now, and if they come physically, it will be 2 days where they have synchronous work with the teacher and then 3 days asynchronous. The thing is, and to be honest, because we have forms 4 to 6 out now, and many of those same teachers teach lower school, we do have students at this point in time who are going through fully synchronous days because the teachers are in school. And one thing we have tutor asked, and we agreed, that teachers who come to school physically are not mandated to teach synchronously online. And it is not that they cannot choose to do so, or if the school has the equipment to do so, the technology, they can, and many teachers do, but it's not a mandate from the ministry. So that really is a proposal that the forms 1 to 3 return on a rotational basis, at least 2 days a week and 5 days in a 10-day cycle, and that the classrooms operate at 50% capacity, and where there is a possibility for schools to vary that attendance model, the ones that we have suggested in the document, they can do so with the permission of the ministry based on their unique circumstances at the schools. So that's the proposal.
What about primary schools, Minister? Is that being contemplated just yet, or we're trying to get secondary out and maybe in another month then primary schools?
The primary school suggestion is that we have the standard fives come out to school only at this point in time from February, because these secondary school students have the potential to be vaccinated, and the primary school students do not. Those who are not 12 years old, a little more caution is being taken and looking at the primary school return. But that really is what we hope to be able to do, and we, are still at the decision-making stage with both of them. But we feel as though if we have to choose one based on our circumstances, we would choose secondary school students who have the option of being vaccinated, and therefore given that extra layer of protection to come out.
And just to get your take on it, Minister, are you satisfied with SEA, how it happened last year, in terms of, just the arrangement, students coming out just for one day to write the exam, and of course the performance?
The stakeholders, when we met with the stakeholders, they really would have preferred to have students come out at least a month before the exam to be able to have that in-school preparation. Last year, unfortunately, we were not able to do that based on our circumstances. This year, of course, we would want to be able to do it, but it would depend heavily, again, on our circumstances, and we're not in a better position this year than we were last year. So, no, I'm not satisfied that the students could not come out. However, I wish it could have happened, but in all the preparations that have been made and that were made, it just was not possible. And the stakeholders understood that. What I want to commend, however, is the preparation of the principals, our school supervisors, our teachers, because thousands of our school personnel at the primary school level are involved in the implementation of the SEA. And I can tell you that everyone involved made the greatest effort to ensure that all was in place for the SEA to come off on that day, and so there was not any major issue happening on that day, and the students were able to write their exams in safety. I visited a couple of schools, and everything was put in place. We got all reports from around the country, so I'm satisfied that we did the best we could in the circumstances. In terms of performance, we did see a drop in the performance from 2020 to 2021, and of course that can be easily related to the fact that our students were not out physically. The teachers would have done the best they could to prepare them, but naturally there would be a fallout of students who need that personal touch, need that support, need that preparation coming down into the exam. And so that is exactly what we're hoping we'll be able to give those students that extra edge for this year. But again, we want to be able to offer that in the safety of the circumstance. And so that's where we are, to make a decision on that based on our circumstances.
And of course, Minister, as you talk about stakeholders, we did interview NASPA last week, and one of the things that they did point out was the state of disrepair at schools, even as we prepare for students to come back out. Many out in the public may have criticized and said, well, within those 2 years that students were not at school, work should have been done, etc., etc. How would you respond to this? What is the state of the physical state of schools?
Work has been done on schools continuously since schools were closed in 2020 March, and will continue to be done on schools. I don't know if you could recall, but every single time a school is to be opened, you would hear about, repairs need to be done at schools. And this is an ongoing thing. So you can do work at a school now on a particular area, and then something else pops up, and that needs to be attended to as well. So that is the circumstance for over 600 schools. Mm-hmm. And we have spent over the past 2 years more than $200 million doing repairs at schools, and that will continue because there's always something. If you think about your home, there's always something to be done. Consider that across 600 odd schools, where we have over 80% of them being over 50 years old. So this is the circumstance at the school. So there's always work to be done, always. And the ministry always has to juggle between the priority items, because certainly we don't have the funds that will allow us to have all the schools exactly the way that it is needed. So if a school requires a paint job and a school requires their toilets fixed, obviously the ones with the toilet are going to get the priority. And that school with the paint job will say, listen, the school is not looking the way it should for students and it needs to be painted. If a school has furniture that needs to be replaced and in another school a water pump requires fixing, then the water pump would get the priority. The furniture, of course, will have to take a backseat to that. And in any case, whether the furniture is ordered or not, that will take a process and a time. So there'll always be, when you speak to any school principal, there'll always be something that needs to be done. What the ministry focuses on and continues to focus on are the priority areas: plumbing, sewer, electrical, and any OSH guidelines that we may get for a school. These are the things. And if we have critical infrastructural issues, these are the critical things that have to be taken care of. So there'll always be a situation where schools need infrastructural work, and that has been ongoing over the past 2 years.
As you speak about preparedness, could you explain to us your rationale between, because we did notice that a distance of 3 feet as opposed to 6 feet is to be adhered to in schools. Why 3 feet and not 6 when the Ministry of Health would, advise you to stay at least 6 feet from others? That's one. And the issue of sanitizers, additional cleaning staff, and so on to ensure that, the school is clean, tabletops, etc. are wiped. Principals did indicate that, additional funding may be required for these things.
Mm-hmm. With respect to the cleaning schedule, we've met with MTS, and MTS does have an amended cleaning schedule that's approved by the Ministry of Health for the COVID circumstances. So there's more frequent cleaning of the spaces and so on, and that is ongoing at the schools. With respect to the distancing, we would always meet with the Ministry of Health, of course, to approve at the end our final proposal after meeting with the stakeholders and so on. And the CDC guidelines that are followed and that we would quote in our documents so that our stakeholders can take a look at them themselves would recommend 3 feet. And that was quite some time ago, because it is recognized that for school to be effective, 6 feet distancing will not allow students to get into the school, and the capacity of the school to be so low that schools would not be able to operate. So we are not just pulling 3 feet out of a hat. We are working with the CDC guidelines that are given. The most recent guidelines were issued in November, and so we are working with their guidelines. And as a matter of fact, those guidelines also speak to the fact that in cases where you can't even maintain 3 feet distancing, you must put other layers in place. And the other layers that they describe would be a vaccination program, would be universal masking for students at the school, and would be entry protocols to ensure that students come into the school and they have the availability of sanitizers and hand wash stations and so on. And these things are already in place at our schools. The ministry has taken a more active role in providing cleaners, sanitizers, tissues, and so on, masks to our schools, temperature scanners. We did handheld earlier in 2020 and 2021, and we have provided also freestanding scanners, temperature scanners now to the schools. So that is in place at our schools. What you would find is that in some of the foreign schools, the universal masking is not in place. That's a toss-up between whether students and parents would agree to that. We have that in place by law. In those schools as well, because of changes in temperature, they would have, when it came to winter, and that last term that has gone, they would have experienced winter. And so they did away with the entry protocols because they wouldn't want students standing up, lining up in the cold. And so those are some of the things that happened at the schools abroad. And so we have those things in place in Trinidad and Tobago, and therefore we are well within the CDC guidelines in our recommendations.
So, Minister, alongside the academics with the reopening of schools, a lot of persons have been asking, what about school sports? Just wanting to see all children back on the field, the schoolboy cricket, a little bit of football. Will these be allowed?
As it is, we have to be guided by the Ministry of Sport and what is permissible based on the health guidelines. At this time, we have said in our recommendations that there will be no extracurricular activity that is not virtual. However, we do have students who have to do their physical education examinations. And so last year, we would have approved the Ministry of Health the guidelines to allow for them to complete their practicals, when they had to do their different practicals and so on. So we've had that approval from the Ministry of Health, but in terms of extracurricular activities, the football clubs and so on, we have asked that schools not engage in those activities at this time. We want to prioritize the activities that are academic in nature at this point in time, though that is not something that we feel is sufficient for our students. At this time, we're taking all necessary precautions to ensure that we can get schools back up and running, and hope that in the very near future, as we get them into the classroom for their schoolwork and so on, we could extend. We've actually asked that we encouraged virtual engagement in clubs and so, because we recognize the need for our students to have something other than the academic. But at this point in time, we're focusing on prioritizing the academic group.
Education Minister Dr. Nian Gadsby-Dolly, let me thank you so much for joining us and so much for sharing. I'm sure a lot of parents and teachers were comforted by hearing you this morning, and we do wish you very fruitful discussions with stakeholders and a very successful reopening of terms 2 and 3 for students. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too, Minister. Of course, to our viewers, here's a fruit bowl submitted by one of you, proudly displaying a backyard harvest.